Imagine owning a firearm legally, following every rule, completing every background check, and doing everything the law requires. Now imagine that in less than 20 minutes, you could be sitting in the back of a police car, handcuffed and confused because of that same firearm you legally own. It sounds unbelievable, but situations like this happen more often than people realize. Many law-abiding gun owners find themselves caught in a legal trap during routine traffic stops, not because they broke the law, but because they didn't fully understand how the rules work during those moments on the side of the road. There is a specific scenario that can quickly escalate from a simple traffic stop into a serious legal situation. It usually begins with something ordinary, getting pulled over by a police officer. What happens next can determine whether you drive away with a warning or find yourself facing a major legal problem. The key difference often comes down to understanding your rights and knowing exactly how these encounters work. Picture a typical evening drive. Everything feels normal. Suddenly, flashing lights appear in the rearview mirror. Like most drivers, your heart rate increases slightly. You pull over safely, knowing you have done nothing wrong. You are calm, cooperative, and respectful. The officer approaches the vehicle and asks for your license and registration. You provide the documents as requested. Everything feels routine and straightforward. Then comes a question that seems simple but carries serious implications. The officer asks whether there are any weapons in the vehicle. If you are a legal gun owner, you might instinctively answer honestly and say yes. Perhaps you also explain that the firearm is legally owned and that you have the proper permit or license. From your perspective, you are being transparent and cooperative. You assume honesty will make the situation easier. But sometimes, that answer completely changes the tone of the encounter. The officer's voice may become more serious. The conversation shifts. You may be asked to step out of the vehicle. Suddenly, you are standing on the side of a busy road while the officer reaches into the car and removes your firearm. Now, the situation feels very different. Instead of a routine traffic stop, the focus is now on your firearm. The officer may begin inspecting it, looking at it closely, and handling it in ways you didn't expect. In that moment, many people feel powerless because they are unsure of what the law actually allows the officer to do. This feeling of uncertainty is exactly what creates problems for many law-abiding citizens. When people don't understand the legal boundaries of a traffic stop, they cannot recognize when those boundaries are crossed. But once you understand the rules governing these situations, the entire dynamic changes. Knowledge gives you the ability to protect your rights without creating unnecessary conflict. There are several key legal limits that apply during traffic stops. When those limits are crossed, the officer may be acting outside the law. These moments can be thought of as legal tripwires. Once you understand them, you can recognize when a stop moves beyond its lawful purpose. The first major tripwire involves something known as an unlawful delay. A traffic stop has a very specific legal purpose. Its mission is to address the traffic violation that justified the stop in the first place. Nothing more. Courts have consistently emphasized that a traffic stop is supposed to be temporary and focused. The officer is allowed to perform certain actions directly related to that mission. This typically includes checking a driver's license, verifying registration and insurance, checking for outstanding warrants, and issuing a warning or citation if necessary. Once those tasks are complete, or reasonably should be complete, the traffic stop is supposed to end. The legal authority that allowed the officer to stop the vehicle does not automatically allow them to begin investigating unrelated matters. The stop cannot be prolonged just to look for evidence of other possible crimes unless the officer develops a legitimate legal reason to do so. This principle was reinforced in a major Supreme Court decision called Rodriguez v. United States. The court made it clear that police cannot extend a traffic stop beyond its original purpose simply to conduct additional investigations. When an officer delays the stop to investigate something unrelated, such as running the serial number of a firearm, that can cross the line into an unlawful extension of the stop. Running a gun serial number is not part of the original traffic violation investigation. It becomes a separate inquiry. If the officer has already completed the tasks related to the traffic violation but continues holding you there to examine the firearm further, the stop may have been illegally extended. The second major tripwire involves what legal experts describe as a search within a seizure. Police officers are often allowed to temporarily secure a weapon during a traffic stop for safety reasons. Courts generally recognize that traffic stops can be unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. Because of that, officers may take temporary control of a firearm while the stop is taking place. However, securing a weapon for safety purposes is not the same thing as searching it. To understand the difference, think about a simple analogy. Imagine someone takes possession of your backpack temporarily to ensure it doesn't contain anything dangerous. That would be a temporary seizure. But if they begin digging through every pocket, examining your personal items, and reading documents inside, that becomes a search. In legal terms, those are two very different actions. A seizure simply means temporarily taking control of an item. A search involves examining that item in a way designed to discover evidence. The Supreme Court addressed this issue in a case known as Arizona versus Hicks. The court ruled that manipulating an object in order to read a serial number constitutes a search under the Fourth Amendment. This means that if an officer picks up a firearm, turns it over, adjusts it, or otherwise manipulates it specifically to locate the serial number, that action can legally qualify as a search. And searches require a higher legal standard. In most situations, an officer must have probable cause to believe that evidence of a crime will be found before conducting such a search. Probable cause requires specific facts or evidence suggesting illegal activity. Simply owning a firearm legally does not create probable cause. Firearm ownership itself is lawful and protected. If an officer manipulates a secured firearm solely to inspect or record its serial number without probable cause, that action may fall into the category of a warrantless search. The third tripwire involves something called the plain view doctrine. This legal concept is often misunderstood. Under certain circumstances, officers are allowed to seize evidence that is clearly visible without conducting a search. If illegal items are sitting openly in plain sight and their illegal nature is immediately obvious, the officer may be able to act without a warrant. However, the plain view doctrine has strict requirements. One of the most important requirements is that the illegal nature of the object must be immediately apparent. For example, if an officer sees illegal drugs sitting on a dashboard, the illegal nature of that item is obvious. The officer does not need to conduct a further search to determine whether the item is contraband, but a legally owned firearm does not automatically appear illegal. Simply seeing a gun does not indicate that a crime has occurred. The firearm could be owned legally, transported legally, and possessed with the proper permits depending on the jurisdiction. Because of that, the plain view doctrine does not automatically allow officers to investigate the firearm further. In order to determine whether a firearm might be stolen, the officer would typically need to locate and examine the serial number. If that requires picking up the firearm, turning it over, or adjusting it to read the number, the officer has now conducted a search rather than merely observing something in plain view. The difference between observation and manipulation is critical in determining whether the law has been followed. Of course, courts do recognize that officer safety is a serious concern during traffic stops. Officers are given a certain amount of flexibility to protect themselves when encountering potentially dangerous situations. However, that flexibility is not unlimited. The law draws a clear distinction between actions taken for immediate safety and actions taken to investigate possible crimes. Securing a firearm temporarily to ensure it cannot be used during a stop may be considered a safety measure. Running a serial number to investigate whether the firearm might be stolen is an investigative step. Those two purposes are very different under the law. Understanding these distinctions allows you to recognize when an encounter moves from a routine stop into something more complex. But knowledge alone is not enough. You also need a practical strategy for handling these situations calmly and effectively. The first part of that strategy involves understanding your legal obligations before a traffic stop ever occurs. Different states have different rules regarding firearm disclosure. Some states require individuals carrying firearms to inform an officer during a traffic stop. Other states do not require any disclosure unless the officer specifically asks. Knowing your local law is extremely important. If the law requires disclosure, you must comply with that requirement. Failing to do so could create unnecessary legal trouble. However, if there is no legal duty to volunteer that information, there is generally no requirement to bring it up on your own. This does not mean lying or misleading an officer. It simply means not volunteering information that the law does not require you to provide. The second part of the strategy involves clearly refusing consent for searches. During traffic stops, officers sometimes ask drivers whether they would mind if the vehicle is searched. Many people feel pressured to say yes because they want to appear cooperative, but consent changes everything legally. If you voluntarily agree to a search, you effectively waive many of the legal protections that might otherwise apply. That is why it is important to respond calmly and clearly if you do not wish to allow a search. A simple statement expressing that you do not consent to any searches is often enough. Many people worry that refusing consent makes them appear guilty. In reality, exercising your rights cannot legally be used as evidence that you committed a crime. It simply indicates that you understand your legal protections. The third part of the strategy involves clarifying whether you are being detained. Sometimes traffic stops begin to extend longer than expected. When that happens, it may be appropriate to ask questions that clarify your legal status during the encounter. Two questions are particularly helpful in these situations. The first question is whether you are currently being detained. If the answer is no, then the next question becomes whether you are free to leave. If the officer confirms that you are free to go, you may leave the scene. If the officer says you are not free to leave, then you are officially being detained. At that point, the officer must have a legal justification, typically something known as reasonable suspicion, to continue holding you there. Asking these questions can help define the boundaries of the encounter. The final part of the strategy involves remaining calm and cooperative while documenting the situation verbally if necessary. Physical resistance is never the solution during a roadside encounter. Even if you believe your rights are being violated, resisting an officer physically can escalate the situation dramatically and create additional legal complications. The better approach is to remain calm, comply with lawful orders, and clearly state that you do not consent to any searches if that is your position. If it is safe and legal to do so, recording the interaction may also provide helpful documentation later. Calmly stating that you are not resisting while also noting that you do not consent to a search can create an accurate record of what occurred. Maintaining composure during these situations can make a significant difference if the encounter is later reviewed in court. Ultimately, understanding the rules governing traffic stops can protect you from unnecessary legal trouble. The most important thing is recognizing when a routine stop begins crossing into investigative territory. Remember the three key legal tripwires: an unlawful delay that extends the stop beyond its original purpose, a search conducted under the guise of securing a weapon, and the misuse of the plain view doctrine to justify further investigation. Knowing these principles gives you the ability to recognize when the line has been crossed. At the same time, the four-step roadside strategy helps you respond in a calm, lawful, and effective manner. Understanding disclosure requirements, refusing consent to searches, clarifying whether you are detained, and maintaining composure are all powerful tools for protecting your rights. Traffic stops can feel stressful and unpredictable, but knowledge removes much of the uncertainty. When you understand the legal boundaries that apply during these encounters, you are far less likely to be caught off guard. Staying informed, staying calm, and exercising your rights responsibly can make all the difference when those flashing lights appear in your rearview mirror. If you found this breakdown helpful and want more clear explanations about legal rights, traffic stops, and real-world situations that affect everyday citizens, make sure to support the channel. Your engagement helps bring more content like this to viewers who want to stay informed and prepared. And remember one final principle that many legal experts emphasize: when it comes to protecting your rights during encounters with law enforcement, the most powerful tool you have is knowledge.